Welcome to Chris Boyle's Year in Review for 2023, brought to you by the Delaware Valley Property and Liability Trust. I am your host, Chris Boyle. For those of you who don't know me, I am a 16-year veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department, retiring as a lieutenant back in 2005. I spent 16 years thereafter as an attorney at Marshall Dennehy, a firm that DVPLT uses quite frequently on civil rights defense, and that's what I did, the defense of police officers and police departments and civil rights lawsuits. In the last 3 years, I have run my own business, Chris Boyle Consulting, which I do training for law enforcement, as well as litigation support services and expert testimony throughout the country on areas of police liability. I'm here today to share with you some of the bottom lines of training that I did over the last year for those who subscribe to my monthly case law updates. I'm not going to go case by case through all of them. No, that's what the subscription is for. But what I hope to do, and the way I think that this training will be most useful to you, is I'm going to put up what the bottom line from a particular case is and talk about that just briefly. I would suggest, since I'm going to be sending a copy of the slide deck to DivPlit, that you request a copy of it, and that over the course of the next year, from time to time, your supervisors, your subordinate supervisors, or if you are a subordinate supervisor watching this video, you take one of these topics and you address it with your troops. These topics are pulled, and these cases were pulled by me specifically because they come up over and over again in law enforcement. You'll see some overlap between some of the concepts. Rodriguez moment is a particular example, comes up in different ways throughout the course of the year, but you can use these to perform some training of your own. You don't have to go over case-specific things. Go over what your troops are seeing out there on the street. Let them ask you questions. If you don't have the answers to those questions, go to someone who does, whether that's the solicitor for your particular department, your risk training folks at DivPlit, or yours truly. Always happy to help with a stump the chump type question. But with that said, let's get right into it. And this bottom line from one of the cases this year. Terry further held that when an officer is justified in believing that the individual whose suspicious behavior he is investigating at close range is armed and presently dangerous to the officer or to others, the officer may conduct a pat-down search to determine whether the person is in fact carrying a weapon. The purpose of this limited search is not to discover evidence of crime, but to allow the officer to pursue his investigation without fear of violence. That is a very succinct holding and statement of what Terry stands for, but is one of the most misunderstood concepts in law enforcement. There is a belief among some in law enforcement that we can pat down just anybody we run across. If we get that spider sense a-tingling and we decide that there's some reason in our head. Well, if we can articulate what that reason is to believe the person is armed and presently dangerous, then we can do a pat down. Then we will have reasonable suspicion. But if all it is a feeling, a hunch, the hair standing up on the back of your neck that you can't articulate, then you have no business doing a pat down. Also, there is a belief that everyone who's present during service of a search warrant can be patted down. That is also not the case. You need specific, articulable, reasonable suspicion for each and every person at that scene that you intend to pat down. Terry frisks are not automatic, and we need to get that through our heads in law enforcement and get that onto our paperwork, more importantly. Document what formed reasonable suspicion in your head, and that should carry the day. Terry is something comes up over and over again. If you're not familiar with Terry v. Ohio, get familiar with it. It's certainly worth a read, the case in its entirety. There are entire volumes written on it thereafter and the way it comes up. You can do Terry frisk of the inside of a vehicle, ladies and gentlemen, if you can show that the person has control over that area and that they are armed and presently dangerous, or you believe them to be armed and presently dangerous. An important point here, you can be wrong. You don't have to be absolutely correct in that. You can be wrong in your belief. Pat them down or pat down the interior of a car on reasonable suspicion and turn out to be wrong. The law has no problem with that. That does not subject you to liability in federal court. All right, our next bottom line is this one. The officer emphasized that it was his extensive training experience on the Allegheny County District Attorney's narcotic enforcement team that allowed him to recognize the object as stamped bags of heroin. What's the point here? The point here is that we hide our candles under baskets for some reason. We don't tell the court why it is that we are, in fact, qualified to make these determinations, what our training is, what our experience is. We don't list it in our affidavits of probable cause, and we're certainly not listing it in the narrative section of our arrest reports. What was it about this behavior? How is it that you, Officer Boyle, recognize a hand-to-hand transaction when Joe the plumber could look at the same thing and look at and see two guys shaking hands? What is it among your, how many arrests have you made? What is your training? How far did you go in school, Mr. Boyle? These are questions that you can answer specifically as to your law enforcement training. And so when I see a case over the course of the year that brings that out, I like to bring it to your attention. If you are reviewing affidavits of probable cause or arrest reports and you're not seeing this, ladies and gentlemen, then something is in fact missing from those reports. All right. Our next bottom line, and we'll just keep going for about an hour here, ladies and gentlemen. That is my intention. And at an hour, we will end it. That's not to say that there isn't more to go over. There is a multitude of things to go over and things that come up month after month. You should stay abreast of this situation and stay abreast of the case law as best you can. Obviously, we'd love to have your department in training, but if not, these cases are available for free through different search engines on the internet. All right, our next bottom line. The fact that an accused has been drinking does not automatically invalidate his subsequent incriminating statements. The test is whether he had sufficient mental capacity at the time of giving his statement to know that he was saying what he was saying and to have voluntarily intended to say it. Recent imbibing or the existence of a hangover does not make his confession inadmissible, but goes only to the weight to be accorded to it. How are we going to establish that the person, despite the fact that they were under the influence of drugs or alcohol, was still able? By describing the questions that were asked and answered by the person, by describing their sobriety or their limited sobriety, whatever it happens to be, by describing the portable breath test that we gave them and what the results of that were, by describing what the blood test results later showed was their level of intoxication at the time we were dealing with them. And that's not to say we all know about Grandpa Chris. Grandpa Chris can drink a half a case of beer and seem like nothing happened to him at all. Well, if you're dealing with Grandpa Chris, his blood alcohol content might be 0.3 or something, but he'd be dead or close to it, but he might still be speaking. The blood alcohol content alone is not going to be enough, but it is certainly a factor courts would look to. There is case law from the past 12 months, I will tell you also, where we are taking people into custody for intoxication where the court has been troubled, or the courts of the Commonwealth specifically, the Superior Court, has been troubled by the fact that we didn't at least offer a portable breath test to the person that we're taking into custody. Something to keep in mind. All right, what's our next bottom line? A plain view doctrine. The plain view doctrine. I love the plain view doctrine. You see something, you say something. You see something, you grab something. Good stuff. The plain view doctrine allows the omission of evidence seized without a warrant when, number one, an officer views the object from a lawful vantage point, and number two, it is immediately apparent to him that the object is incriminating, and number three, the officer has a lawful right of access to the object. Plain view is alive and well. There's some belief that under Alexander we lost plain view. We did not lose plain view in any way, shape, or form. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the Superior Court thereafter, different bodies of the Superior Court, different jurists have said plain view doctrine alive and well. You see something in plain view from a place you are allowed to be, you can seize it. All right? If that means then we stop our search and we get a warrant to search the remainder of the area or the remainder of the vehicle, then that's exactly what we're going to do. It's like eating one potato chip. I understand that. But we need to stop ourselves. When we come across an incriminating piece of evidence in plain view, seize the vehicle. Shut down the residence. Get a warrant to search the remainder of it. Where there's one gun, there is quite possibly a second. Where there are some drugs, there are quite likely to be more, along with U.S. currency and other indicia of drug dealing. We're going to want to get a warrant for those things. Stopping ourselves is one of the problems that I see over and over again in the case law this year, where police officers get to a point where they should be stopping and getting a warrant, should be stopping and doing something else, and they are not. What do I have now is one of the most important questions you can ask yourself in law enforcement. And if you receive my monthly training, you hear it over and over again. What do I have now? Circumstances just changed. I had a car stop for a broken taillight, and now I see a firearm in the back seat. Now I see a corner-tied bag with what looks like crack cocaine or heroin in it. These are the things we have to ask ourselves. What do I have now? Circumstances have changed. Am I still allowed to keep going the way I've been going, or have I reached a point where I need a warrant or consent? These are the questions that we are going to ask ourselves, and we should be asking ourselves over and over again. Here's another bottom line. The power and intent to control does not need to be exclusive. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has recognized that constructive possession may be found in one or more actors where the item in issue is in an area of joint control and equal access. Constructive possession. You do not have to find someone actually holding on to the drugs or holding on to the gun to show constructive possession. They have to be able to reduce it to their immediate control. They have to have the ability to do that. Just being in proximity to an illegal substance or object does not make out constructive possession, but is certainly one of the factors that will be considered. They have to be able to reduce it to their immediate and effective possession, actual possession. All right, they need to be able to do that, but more than one person can do that. The most recent case in the case law I'm putting out for February of 2024 is a case involving a gentleman who had a bag of drugs under his leg in the driver's seat of the car, but there were 3 other passengers. It was his argument on appeal that the other 3 people in the car could have also accessed his drugs. Well, they didn't. They were sitting underneath his seat. We could have charged the other 3 people as well. Under joint constructive possession, we can do that. That's not to say we are going to do that. We are most likely going to charge the person who's closest to it or who could most immediately get it under his actual possession or in his actual possession and under his dominion and control. All right, let's just keep going. I'm feeling good about it. Why not? Search warrants for cell phones must include how we know this is the suspect's phone and how it is connected to a crime. Detail is not a red-headed stepchild. Give that information to the court. A bunch of cell phones. I'm pretty sure if I write a book, it could be on this subject, on cell phones and the right to search them, not to search them. But one of the areas where we are falling short in law enforcement when we seize a phone is how we know this is the suspect's phone. How do we know that this phone is the suspect's phone if we seize it? Perhaps we have asked them when we're gathering biographical information, not biological information, biographical information, he said. When we're obtaining that, we ask him for his phone number. If we then dial that phone number and it rings on that cell phone, that would be a good indication that that is in fact his cell phone. The fact that it is on his person and we find him alone, another good indication. But the judge won't know that if we don't write it down or we don't testify to it. So let's make sure we're doing that. How we know this is his phone and how it is connected to a crime. Everybody in the world seems to have a cell phone. Most people do, including teenage kids, all right? Just having a cell phone is not enough. How do we connect it to a crime? We do not automatically get to search cell phones. While cell phones are a big part of the drug trade, they are not the only part of the drug trade, and that is not the only use of a cellular phone. So keep that in mind. How are we connecting cell phones to drug dealing is a specific one you're going to come across, because we set up this deal or this purchase by a confidential informant by calling that number, and this person answered that phone, or the person we know to be, Chris Boyle answered the phone. That is how we're going to tie one to the other. All right, moving right along. I'm sure we have other bottom lines of some import to you, and here's one. However, probable cause to believe that a man has committed a crime on the street does not necessarily give rise to probable cause to search his home. The affidavit of probable cause must establish a substantial nexus between the suspect's home and criminal activity or contraband sought to permit the search of the home. We're seeing this topic come up over and over again, ladies and gentlemen. We are failing ourselves and we are failing the court in not giving this to them. Probable cause to believe a man has committed a crime on the street does not necessarily give rise to probable cause to search his home. Guy's out on the street dealing, but we want to search his house. How do we draw that nexus? How do we get that substantial nexus between the two? The fact that he has to go into his house to re-up. The fact that he, after each sale, goes back into the residence. The fact that he comes back out with money, without money, with drugs, without drugs, whatever it happens to be. The fact that while under our surveillance, he went from one house to another, came back, and then made a subsequent sale. These are things we need to document. The courts are looking, some of them, in the Superior Court, especially in Pennsylvania, are looking for ways to negate an arrest or to suppress evidence. And that is how we give it to them, by not drawing that substantial nexus. Tell the court, just tell the court how we know that Chris Boyle is tied both to property A and property B. Give the court as much as is humanly possible. Include in that take that candle out from under the basket, your experience that you've made 100, 200, 1,000 narcotics arrests, and then the majority of those arrests, or in a great number of those arrests, or whatever it is, the person re-ups at their house or keeps contraband or proceeds from the sale of contraband in their residence apart from the location of the sale. to try and keep it out of law enforcement view. These are the things you're going to want to put. Put your training, put your experience, put everything that you have surveilled and witnessed in this case. Give that to the court. You'll be glad that you did. All right, we're a quarter of the way through our 1 hour year in review, and we're moving right along. How's this one? An inventory search. I love inventory searches. So do you, don't lie. An inventory search is reasonable if it is conducted pursuant to reasonable standard police procedures and in good faith and not for the purpose of investigation. The inventory search is not a substitute for a warrantless investigatory search. Here's where we run into the problem. There is thinking among some in law enforcement that an inventory search is in fact a substitute for a warrant under all circumstances, that all we have to do is say it's an inventory search and then we can do it. If what we're doing is looking for evidence of a crime, we are not performing a proper inventory search. We're not supposed to be doing that. It's not for the purpose of investigation or for looking for evidence of a crime. If we're looking for evidence of a crime, we should be getting a search warrant. If we're doing an inventory search and we come up with evidence of a crime, we should stop our inventory search and get a warrant. All right? If there was a bank robbery and we find the dye pack soaked, some of the dye pack soaked bills under the seat, we are going to stop our search and get a search warrant for the remainder of the car so we can check the trunk for the rest of those dye soaked bills. All right? Stopping and getting a warrant. What do I have now? A question you're going to ask yourself over and over again. Totally reasonable question to ask. Inventory search is reasonable if it's conducted pursuant to a reasonable standard police procedure. How do we show that it is a reasonable standard police procedure? Because we bring a copy of that procedure in writing with us to court. This is one of the few areas where we would do that. One of the few areas where we would ever bring a policy into a courtroom, ladies and gentlemen, but this is one of them. If you have an inventory search policy, if you're going to be doing inventory searches, you need a written policy. If you don't have one, write to Divot. Email them. Pause this video and email them right now. They will be happy to send you one. Every member of the Delaware Valley Property and Liability Trust should have a written inventory search policy. And we inventory every vehicle, not just the juicy ones, not just the pretty ones, not just the ones we believe are going to contain contraband, but every car. And we are going to document what we find, not just the good stuff, not just the juicy stuff, not just the funny stuff, everything we find in the car. Some of it is going to be various trash, all right, crumpled up papers and empty beer cans. Okay, we can do that. Better yet, why don't we write that we found 6 empty beer cans with crumpled up pieces of paper? If we are finding things of value, in one case that we had this year in my monthly updates, we had an officer who found a gold chain hanging from a mirror in the car. He is seen on his body camera recovering this chain. He did not document it in the inventory search. The court took a look at that and said, this officer is trying to say that they are documenting things of value in the car, and they didn't document this. That, the court said, is definitely a problem. Have a written policy, follow that written policy in every case, and bring a copy of that written policy with you to court with a copy for the district attorney so that they can turn it over to the other side if that's appropriate. That's their job, not ours. All right. Our next bottom line, justification is a defense to a charge involving use of deadly force by a defendant who is not in his home or place of work only if all of the following elements are present. All of them. All 3 of them have to be present. The defendant reasonably believed that he was in imminent danger of death, serious bodily injury, kidnapping, or sexual assault, and that it was necessary to use deadly force to prevent such harm. That's the first one. Number 2, the defendant did not provoke that threat or danger. They didn't start this fight. And number 3, the defendant could not safely retreat. There is a duty to retreat if you're going to use justification as a defense to a charge involving the use of deadly force. We see this every now and then. Enough of these cases came up over the course of a year that I thought it important to bring at least one. I think I did 2 or 3 justification as a defense cases this year because it does keep coming up. Why is this important to you? This sounds like something that would concern the district attorney, and it certainly would, but you can do a lot to help. If you know that somebody's going to say that they were defending themselves, that it was self-defense, justification is defense to a charge, if you can establish or disestablish any of these 3 factors, then do that. All right. If you can write in your arrest report, you can write in your incident report that the person did have the ability to safely retreat, that they could have merely closed the door to their home. All right. If you can show the defendant did not provoke that threat or danger, they were sitting in their house watching Wheel of Fortune, minding their own business, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the door got kicked in and in came bad guy number 1. That's something you're going to want to document. All right, especially if bad guy number one wants to come in and say that he's was just in the house minding his own business. All right, we can document that he forcibly entered, that it wasn't his house. These are things that are going to aid in that case of proving or disproving justification self-defense. All right, what's next? Moving right along. The offense of false identification of law enforcement does not require an explanation of why they are subject to an official investigation of a violation of the law, but could it hurt? If we are going to charge someone with false identification of law enforcement, we have to tell them they are the subject of an official investigation of a violation of the law, and it could not hurt to tell them what that violation of the law is. Now, there are some among you who will say to me and say to themselves, yeah, but if we give that up, if we tell them that, then that takes one of the tools out of our toolkit because now they know that we know. All right, I understand that there are going to be circumstances where you're not going to want to tell them what the violation of the law is, but the courts are not going to look at it the way you and I look at it in that regard. If the person asks violation of what law, they're going to want to see that we told them, or a good reason why we didn't. False identification to law enforcement requires that they are told they are the subject of an official investigation of the law. Use those words, ladies and gentlemen. There are going to be circumstances that are going to show they are the subject to of an official investigation of a violation of the law. Without using those words, those facts are going to be present. But it's not going to hurt to say it. Use those words if you're going to charge with that particular offense. All right, we're not going to give that one any more time. We're going to move along to this. While there is no hard and fast list of factors evincing voluntariness, some considerations include, all right, whether this person is giving voluntary consent, whether they are giving a voluntary statement. Here are 6 of the things we're going to look at. Definitely worth going over in roll call a couple of times a year. The defendant's custodial status. Are they in custody? Are they behind locked doors or in a cell in our headquarters? That would show that they were in custody, and person's voluntariness is going to be severely diminished by that fact. It's not to say we can't get consent from someone who's in our cell. It's not to say we can't get a statement from someone who's in our custody. Absolutely we can, but that is one of the factors and the first factor that a court is going to look at. The second, the use of duress or coercive tactics by law enforcement personnel. Saw some cases this year where people's children were threatened. If you don't speak to us, we're going to take your kids away. They're going to go to DHS and you'll never see them again. That sort of thing. That is coercive tactics, and we're not going to use those. The use of duress. You're not going to get to use the bathroom or get something to eat. You're never going to see your family again. You're going to go into a deep, dark hole, and no one's ever going to remember your name. That sort of thing. Those are coercive tactics. The defendant's knowledge is number 3. Knowledge of his right to refuse to consent. How do we establish that a defendant knew they had a right to refuse to consent? By saying to them, you have the right to refuse consent. It is that simple, and we want to document it. If we are using a written form, wherever possible, we're going to want to get that signed. The defendant's education and intelligence. It's not just education. Some people who never graduated from high school are among the smartest people you will meet. Some people who graduated with a PhD are going to be among the smartest people you meet as well, but that doesn't mean by itself. However, a court's going to look at it and say, this guy never graduated from high school, and we're going to be at the bottom of the hill looking up. We're the ones who are going to try and prove voluntariness of consent. We're going to be at the bottom of the hill. So if the person only has a GED or doesn't have a GED for that matter, that's going to count against us. Their intelligence, if we're capturing this on body camera, that's going to be especially important as well, to show that they do have the intelligence sufficient to make this decision, to make a voluntariness decision for consent. The defendant's belief that no incriminating evidence will be found is an important factor. If they think there's not going to be anything, that is certainly going to help towards their voluntariness. And 6, the extent and level of the defendant's cooperation with law enforcement personnel. How cooperative have they been? Even people who know that they have guilty knowledge or have contraband in their possession, whatever it is, will sometimes give voluntary consent because they believe that their cooperation with law enforcement will be enough to carry the day, or that nobody's going to be able to prove that it was theirs, whatever the case might be. But these are 6 of the factors the court's going to look at. If you can address these in your paperwork, so much the better. Articulation is not a dirty word, ladies and gentlemen. Articulation is putting into writing or putting into words what it is that led to our belief. We use our training and our experience, and we come to these conclusions under a totality of the circumstances most of the time. Just because you know something doesn't mean the court knows it. Make sure that we put it in writing or testify to it, preferably both. All right. Our next bottom line. It is well established that threats and intimidation are not constitutionally protected speech. All right. First Amendment cases and First Amendment like add-ons to Fourth Amendment cases are quite common. We see excessive force cases where they also throw in a First Amendment claim that the only reason we used force at all or used excessive force was because we were taken into custody for saying something they were allowed to say. Ladies and gentlemen, just because someone is being arrested doesn't mean that their First Amendment rights are being violated. Just because they're running their mouth while they're being arrested doesn't mean that it's a First Amendment consideration. However, it is something the courts are going to look at. We have that on body camera. Let's make sure we're saving the body camera from that arrest, as is part of our policy, no doubt. But if someone is claiming that we are citing them for disorderly conduct because of what they said, it's not what someone is saying necessarily in many cases, but the volume or the place and the time at which they're saying these things that is going to be important. First Amendment volumes upon volumes are written on the First Amendment, what people can say and can't say. You can't make threats. You can't engage in child pornography and blackmail and things like that. These are all areas of speech that are not protected. And among those are threats and intimidation. But there is, like I said, a whole study of the First Amendment. And there are cases throughout the decades, one way or the other. Let's make sure that we're being very careful that if you're citing people for disorderly conduct because they are on a loudspeaker, let's say, or blocking the entrance to something, that we are doing so not because of the content of their speech, unless it's threats or intimidation or one of the others of other areas of unprotected speech, but because they've been told to move on and they haven't. They are at an excessive volume, that it is evening hours when people are sleeping, that sort of thing. These are the things we're going to want to document for a First Amendment case. All right, let's squeeze one more into our first half hour here, and then I'm going to take a short break and get a drink of water. An informant's tip may constitute probable cause where police independently corroborate the tip, or where the informant has provided accurate information of criminal activity in the past, or where the informant himself participated in the criminal activity. This is one you can go over a couple times a year. An informant's tip may constitute probable cause where police independently corroborate the tip. All right, you get information that at 2 p.m. Today, a silver Nissan Murano is going to pull up to a particular location, and lo and behold, you're sitting there at 2 o'clock and it does pull up. All right, that's an indicia of reliability. The informant has provided accurate information of criminal activity in the past, not just accurate information, but accurate information of criminal activity in the past. We want to give their batting average. We want to say how many times they have provided this information to law enforcement. That is certainly relevant to our consideration and to the consideration of whether their tip will constitute probable cause or not. Where the informant himself participated in the criminal activity, they are part of the drug dealing enterprise of which they are providing information. That is certainly one of the ways an informant's tip may constitute probable cause, if they have firsthand knowledge. All right? If they are predicting future criminal activity as opposed to just future activity, that's important. Where they're right in one thing, however, the court has said it is likely they are going to be right in other areas as well. An informant's tip may constitute probable cause where police independently corroborate the tip, or where the informant has provided accurate information of criminal activity in the past, or where the informant himself participated in the criminal activity. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for our first half hour. We're going to take a short break, and I'll be back with another half hour after